Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Hegland. I'm the executive director of the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony. And I'm here on a very empty stage in Festival Concert Hall at NDSU. There are no chairs, there are no musicians. They will be here shortly, and we're going to put on a great concert for you. You will enjoy it very much. Maestro Zimmerman has created a wonderful program. There are 8 separate pieces, some small pieces, some larger pieces, piece for percussion, several pieces for strings, a couple of pieces for brass. We're emphasizing the sections of the orchestra, and we're emphasizing some soloists in the orchestra. As you can see also, there's an empty house here. We miss our audiences a great deal. We know that you can't wait to get back, and we can't wait to have you back. Hopefully everything is moving in that direction, and we'll get there hopefully by next fall. Look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, again, enjoy this program very much. I need to thank our sponsors for this program, Mobile Pro for the technical support they are giving us, Minnesota Public Radio, Radisson Blue and Homewood Suites, and Avis. Thank you to those organizations that support us, and thank you to you. Enjoy the concert.
Hello, my name is Peter Haberman, and I am the Director of Bands at Concordia College. A conductor, but a fan of the symphony here in town, and have the opportunity to work with Chris in the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony at times. And today we would just like to hear a little bit about the program from Chris and have a little conversation about the 8 different pieces that are on this program. So, Chris, do you want to start maybe with the impetus behind this concert program, and then we can maybe talk more in depth about each piece?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, this season, we started the season with one big piece and actually a couple of smaller pieces. So there were 3, but there was one major piece. And we're actually, the next concert, our final concert of the season, is only one piece.
Yeah, the Mahler.
Mahler, Das Lied von der Erde. And so these 2, unfortunately, we had to cancel one of our concerts because of the pandemic, but I'm amazed and grateful and thankful that we managed to do as much as we've done, or we're doing. This concert and the previous one, I wanted to sort of do the opposite and try and do several pieces of different characters. And in fact, the pandemic has allowed that to kind of happen because we can only have a very small group on stage, which opens up a different type of repertoire than having a big orchestra normally would. So if there is such a thing as a silver lining in a plague, that's kind of what we've done. And this concert really, the last concert, I think we played 6 pieces. This is 8 now. So it's really a sort of, well, smorgasbord is not quite right because actually there's method behind the madness, but it's a lot of different pieces. And the main impetus, other than a lot of pieces, was to highlight the orchestra itself without soloists from the outside coming in a couple of ways. One way was to highlight sections of the orchestra. So we have pieces just for brass, we have pieces just for strings. We don't actually have any piece only for woodwinds, but one of the pieces, the Debussy really highlights the woodwinds. And we have a piece for percussion as well. And also to highlight individual players of the orchestra as soloists. So that's kind of how the concert has been organized.
It's wonderful. And maybe step us through the pieces. I'm a big fan of the orchestra and orchestral repertoire, but I only knew one of these pieces out of all 8. I had to look them up, and there's such a wonderful sound world. Starting with the Takemitsu, could you talk a bit more about the brass pieces? And
I think the piece you probably knew is the Debussy, right?
Yeah,
because that's the most famous piece on the program, right? So having said what I said about highlighting individuals and sections of the orchestra. So we're starting each half with a brass antiphonal piece. It's by this composer, Japanese composer called Toru Takemitsu, who is probably the best known Japanese composer of a Western influence.
Sure, yeah.
He died, I think, in the 90s. He wasn't terrible. Maybe he's in his mid-60s or something. And the piece is the piece that starts the concert. Well, there are 2 pieces. They're called Signals from Heaven, and we're starting at, and one's called Night Signal and one's called Day Signal. And both of them include a choir on each side. And I'm doing this because if that's the audience, it's going to be antiphonal. So there is in the balcony or loge, whatever you want to call it, over here is one group of brass instruments, and over there's another one. And each piece has two antiphonal choirs, but although they're made up of slightly different instruments. So originally I was thinking, okay, well, we'll start the concert. It'd be nice to start with even though they're fanfares, but they don't sound like a Italian fanfare or something, or an American fanfare for that matter. I thought, well, we'll start with Day Signal. But then as I was thinking about the program itself, I then thought I would reverse it, because there's a kind of narrative to this program, a little bit, I hope not melodramatic, I hope not too corny, but nonetheless there, which is that the concert starts kind of in the dark in every respect, and in the second half it moves into the light. So it starts in the gloomy and it ends in the light. That's sort of the idea. So then I thought I'd start with Night Signal. And so it's only 3 minutes long, this fanfare, this antiphonal choir piece. And then after that, we go to something completely different, highlighting the percussion section of our orchestra.
Christopher
a piece
Rouse.
by Christopher Rouse. He wrote two percussion pieces of similar ilk, inspired by Haitian gods. This one is called Ogun Badagry, who is some sort of Asian god.
The other fire god, I think, or something.
Say again?
I think it's the fire god.
Fire god, is that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, actually, we have a little bit of cinematic accompaniment to this piece too, which has got
do.
fire in it. So this is actually a very short piece, but very intense and a lot of fun, actually. I mean, sort of violent, but in a in
a fun way.
In a kind of fun way, as a sacrificing to the gods. And it takes a long time to set this up, by the way. Each player plays about 6 instruments. So what is that? 6 times 5. That's a lot of instruments.
It's pretty complex,
It's pretty complex, and it's only about 5 to 6 minutes long, but certainly it does highlight our percussion section. Then after that, another switch in gears. We're highlighting the strings, and for the next 3 pieces, which are all very short, basically highlight the strings. The first one is called Mother and Child by
William Grant Still.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's great.
by William Grant Still, who's an American black composer. Very beautiful, simple piece,
gorgeous,
but very, very beautiful. And a little bit, in our theme here, it's a little bit anguished, not hugely, but lamenting, mother and child, but sweet sorrow, I would say.
I agree.
Followed then by another piece for the strings alone, but this time highlighting our principal violist as soloist, Tim Nelson. It's by Benjamin Britten. It's a very early work. He wrote it when he was only 16. He was actually just starting at the Royal Academy of Music.
It's amazing.
So in a sense, it's... Actually, I was talking to Tim today. In a sense, it's got a definite Britten stamp on it, yet it's a bit experimental, as you would imagine. He was only 16. Very short piece just for string orchestra and solo viola, but definitely haunting. It's all kind of slow and a little bit eerie in the colors that the viola brings out, and a little bit enigmatic, and it sort of ends with, well, it doesn't sort of, it ends with just the basses playing a very low note and they dissipate and it stops. Followed then by the last piece of the first program, by the Latvian composer. We played in our previous concert a piece by him called Fratris. This is actually, to my mind, I love that piece. I think this is even more effective, and this is probably his best known of all pieces. It's called Song to the Memory, Song to the Death of Benjamin Britten, or In Memoriam Benjamin Britten. Yeah. He actually never met Britten, but he was greatly inspired by him. He felt I quote Benjamin Britten as a kindred spirit. And he was, deeply affected by his death. And he wrote this piece, which is for string orchestra and just one percussion instrument, a bell. I don't know what you think. I think it's
gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, and it starts. Actually, it's a little bit like the piece we did in the previous program, in that it's material which is repeated again and again, but different.
Yeah,
you know.
the layers are different lengths, so each time you hear things, they're
Yes.
in a
Yeah,
different...
and it gives you the a sort of echoey, swirly effect of
ethereal,
sound.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all based in the minor key very much. It's all actually based on the notes of A minor. And it builds, whereas the previous piece we did built and then died away again, this just keeps building and building till we reach a climactic moment where everyone is playing fortissimo.
Yeah.
And then and it's A minor. It actually ends finally on an A minor chord, very loud. And then the strings just stop, and we're left with the bell. Yeah. This is kind of cool. So the bell, this instrument, the bell, the tubular bell, has so many overtones to it that you can actually hear. That's when you strike a bell, it always sounds to me like sort of out of tune.
Sure.
What's happening is you just hear all these other notes of the harmonic series. So, and you'll hear it when you hear and see this piece. He strikes the bell at the end, and it keeps reverberating, and then you can hear one of the partials come through, which actually is C sharp. I don't mean to be too technical here, but this thing was in A minor. C sharp is actually the major. It would make it A major if you heard it as a major thing. So it ends in this sort of tragedy of A minor, and then suddenly you hear this major. And I think, it often in the Baroque period, as I'm sure you know, Peter, pieces would be in the minor, and then the final chord would be a major chord to kind of wrap it up in a positive fashion. So I think, Pat was thinking, well, rest in peace,
Yeah.
Something
That's
like that.
Beautiful. I didn't.
Yeah, it's quite
recognize that, but now I'm going to be listening.
Yeah,
for it.
it's quite interesting. So that's the end of the first half of the program.
Kind of the dark half.
The dark half, precisely. And maybe that little partial, the C sharp, opens the door. Because the second half we start, and again, the Takamitsu signal, this one is day signal, the two antiphonal choirs, similar music, but obviously a different piece.
And I just have to say, I mean, I'm a brass player myself, but his sound world on both of those pieces is so interesting in a beautiful way. It has density to it, but it also has this openness. I don't know how else to explain that. I mean, the chord structures aren't major and minor necessarily, but you'd mentioned a little bit earlier in a conversation, it has this almost French overtone in terms of this harmonic ambiguity, and I just think it's such a beautiful way that he uses the brass instruments. And
I agree.
Really
I think I don't know his music very well at all. This is the only two pieces of his I've really studied in any depth, but he was clearly concerned with timbre and color of the instruments. I mean, obviously he was concerned with the language, the harmonic language and melodic language, but I think his inspiration was color. And so he got this antiphonal thing going on, and the way he uses the instruments, and the viewers will hear how, one choir will play, then the other choir comes in, and it sort of bleeds, one bleeds into the other fades out.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I can't take credit for this, but I sort of will. I didn't really know this when I set the program up, though. It is true. There's a very French. The chords themselves, and people might hear this, do have a French flavor to them. And I was just thinking, and actually two of the other pieces have that as well. So there's a connection with the Debussy, obviously. Yeah. And even when we talk about the Respighi later on, also has a little bit of this sort of flavor. But in any event, you're right. I think it's intriguing and effective how the colors, how that works,
It's beautiful. I was really I'm interested to get to learn more about him as a composer and his other works, because it's just a beautiful sound. A very unlike others, right? There's color, and then also he'll just sometimes it's called response and it's blocked, but sometimes it bleeds, as you said, from one side to the other, and then sometimes he's spinning around the sounds between the choirs, and
absolutely
they're short little vignettes, but they're really deep at the same times.
Yeah, they are, and indeed they are short. So the night signal we started the concert with is about 3 minutes. This is 2.5. That's it, Yeah. And then at day signal, so, life is getting better. This next piece is Debussy's famous piece called The Afternoon of a Faun. And as the name might suggest, and certainly the music suggests, this is, I think, midday, early afternoon in lovely French, warm countryside, probably just drunk quite a lot of wine, sitting in the meadow, whatever it may be.
Sure, relaxing,
slight
the beautiful
sense
colors.
of Sybaritism, if that's the word, to it. But a very famous piece. Most of the listeners, I think, will recognize it. One thing I've grown to love about this piece, actually, is the fact that nothing really happens. I mean, it's such a daring piece when you think about it. Like much of Debussy's music, I mean, he's completely different from I mean, we lump Impressionists together, I suppose, Debussy, Ravel. Debussy was kind of the first, though. And I don't know if Impressionism is quite... I mean, it is one way to describe his music, but it's not. It's only part of his music. There's something about, you know, his opera, Pelléas and Mélisande,
Yes.
you know, nothing happens. And this piece, you know, it's...
But I think that's
it's
the beauty
gorgeous.
of that impressionism, if you will. I mean, again, like the Takemitsu, it's about color. It's not
Absolutely,
about
color
going
is key.
somewhere. It's not about this form developing to this place, and that we're on a journey as much as we're just experiencing and
Absolutely right.
and-
It's
and
about
being.
the colors of the moment. It's not about a journey. It's so right.
No.
It's the opposite of German music at the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, so we've got our beginning of our day and our afternoon, all of that very colorful. And then that takes us to our
To the
final work, the
final
Respighi.
piece, which is by Respighi, the Italian composer. We've done a couple of his more famous pieces before. And I put this at the end for two main reasons. One is that it does end very, with great rhythmic drive, almost ecstasy, I would say. You know, the complete opposite of the arvo part of the first half. And secondly, it actually features 5 soloists from our orchestra. So that's the kind of the culmination of this concert in that sense too.
And a unique 5 players.
Oh, it's insane. So now I'll go tell a little anecdote here. The piece is done very, very rarely. I've actually had the good fortune to have done it before, which was about 20 years ago. And because the music is still in copyright,
Yeah.
which means that you can't buy the score, you can't buy the music, you have to rent it from the publisher. So I got the score from the publisher not so long ago when we were about to preparing for this concert, and I looked at it and it kind of looked familiar, the markings in the score from whoever had previously conducted it, until I realized it were my markings from 20 years ago. So it suggests that it has
Did you make all the right choices 20 years ago?
Yeah, that's another conversation. That's another conversation. But I was sort of laughed and I was amazed. So it doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't been done, because maybe another conductor didn't do anything, but it suggests very strongly that it hasn't been done for 20 years. That doesn't mean, ladies and gentlemen, it's a terrible piece. On the contrary, it's just a kind of weird piece.
It's
and
amazing.
One of the weirdnesses of it are to have 5 solo instruments in front of an orchestra, albeit only a string orchestra, is in itself kind of strange. But this combination is very odd.
Absolutely.
We have violin, trumpet, oboe, cello, double bass, and piano. And I think Peter, you know, one of the things he must have been doing was deliberately challenging himself technically as to how on God's earth can you mesh these instruments together to make a meaningful. Or is the idea to have everything stick out? I don't think it is, because I think he succeeds.
He does
90% of the time, at least, in having the.
It's really interesting. I mean, when I saw the scoring, I thought, well, there must be a reason, friends or a specific commission. And then also I have this idea of what Respighi sounds like from, you know, all the great works. Thank
you for bringing it up.
It doesn't sound like Respighi in that
No.
sense. And as well as, I'm a trumpet player, I see trumpet on there, and yet the oboe or the violin floats over the trumpet and how he scores and creates these colors. Again, it's colorful, but it's...
I mean, it's funny. So I'm glad you said that, because... So we've done 2 of his most famous pieces here in past seasons. And many of you will know the most famous of all, The Pines of Rome, from a triptych of 3 big orchestral pieces inspired by Rome, where he lived. There's The Pines of Rome, The Fountains of Rome, and Roman Festivals. We've done The Pines, the most famous of the lot, and Roman Festivals too. And the world is completely different from this piece. It's more like Strauss tone poems, big, brash, lush, great fun to play, great fun to conduct, I add. Gorgeous music to sink your teeth into. And actually, you're right, in the trumpet part, for instance, a big trumpet solo in The Pines. And then this piece is the complete opposite. It was written only 2 years before he died. It's a look back to the Baroque period, an homage, I suppose, homage to Vivaldi, Corelli, even Bach.
Sure.
A bit like Stravinsky did in his what they call the neoclassic period, which was around the same time. This was written in 1933. I think he died in 1936. So it's not unique in that sense. Maybe Stravinsky inspired him as well. I don't know. But it is just for string orchestra and these 5 strange instruments in the kind of Baroque concerto grosso style.
Absolutely. And the third, movement, if you will, the third part, the fast part, again, really a lot of interplay and dialogue between, the concerto grosso, if you will, the soloist and the string orchestra. And I also love how he brings back the very beginning and the end, but it's a totally different mood and character. And
that's right. Thank you for mentioning that. So it's absolutely right. The piece begins with a certain musical gesture, and that comes back at the end to kind of tie the ends together. It's in 3 movements, but there's no real pause between the 3. But it will kind of be obvious because the first movement is rhythmic and powerful, and then the second movement, which is personally my favorite, is very soulful, beautiful, 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 sort of a lament, but very slow. And then the last movement, as you mentioned, is these jagged Baroque rhythms, highly energetic from beginning to end. And I have to say, there's a lot of truly virtuosic playing.
Yes.
Absolutely. In this piece. I mean, it's not like virtuosity in the Rachmaninoff piano concerto sense where the piano is center stage from beginning to end, because there are, after all, 5 instruments. But when an instrument is highlighted, boy, do they have to deliver. And often that makes it harder. When they suddenly, the oboe who has 2 bars of ridiculously fast passage, then it's passed off to another instrument. And then the oboe, meanwhile, has to do something completely different.
Yeah, it's really well crafted and well done.
I think so. I mean, the one instrument which does actually kind of bind, one solo instrument which kind of binds it together is, as you might expect, the piano. Who doesn't play all the time by any means, but certainly plays for longer periods without interruption.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also uses all of those. I mean, you're right, it's very virtuosic. I mean, the bass is sometimes in the treble clef, not in the bass clef, and it's just way up high. And
I think our viewers will enjoy watching that. Our poor bass soloist, I mean, he really is
hunched over the whole time, just reaching.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a magnificent work, and I'm really glad to get to know this. I'm really glad all of this repertoire on this program is really gives me new composers to find and seek out, as well as some traditional composers I'm used to hearing, but in very new and unique ways. So thanks for that,
Peter. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to our performance tonight, and
what a great way to highlight the sections and the players of our orchestra for this year. It's a great idea. So thank you so much.
Doing a great job. Thank you. Thanks, Peter. One of the threads of this concert is highlighting players as soloists from our orchestra. And I have with me now Tim Nelson, who is our principal violist, and he will be playing this short, rather interesting and I think a rare piece, and very, very early piece by Benjamin Britten, called Portrait for, well, he actually wrote two pieces called Portraits for Orchestra, and this is the second one, and its subtitle is EBB, which are Benjamin Britten's initials. His name was Edward Benjamin Britten. And it's supposed to be a self-portrait, which makes some sense, I think. Composers sometimes do this, except that he was only 16 when he wrote this. So I don't know what you think, Tim. That's a kind of, it could almost be somewhat arrogant, maybe, to, at the age of 16, write a self-portrait. I don't quite know. I mean, I love the composer. But he was only 16, which is extraordinary, given the quality of this piece. Do you agree, a strange sort of piece? Do you want to talk a little bit about it and what you think?
Yeah, it is kind of, the same tune over and over again. I think it's really interesting, if he was 16 when he wrote it, how recognizable his language is. It sounds so much like Britten. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. It's just for strings, string orchestra, and as a solo viola.
The orchestration's super sparse.
Yeah.
The little pizzas and the muted strings. So it's like a piece that was written by a viola player. Thank you for pointing that out. So viola was Britten's instrument. Yeah.
And he wrote throughout his lifetime. He wrote two or three pieces specifically for viola, this obviously being the first one. What are the challenges, do you think, of this piece? Because it sounds to the ear, it's not hugely virtuosic in the sense that it's all slow, but there are challenges, clearly.
Well, the tune is kind of repetitive. It goes, it's kind of the same thing repeating over and over again with these little climaxes. So the challenge is to add some variety.
There's
not really a lot of development of the material, so.
And it goes kind of high?
It does, a couple times.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned that while we were rehearsing this, Tim and I actually got together and went through it before the first orchestra rehearsal. I agree with you. I don't think this is a criticism, but it is true. There's a short sort of 2-bar tune which is repeated over and over again. So the challenge in a way is to get variety there so it doesn't kind of get stuck. Right?
Yeah.
And so we talked about, and I think you'll hear it, we talked about getting variety, not so much in terms of changing speed, because it's not all one speed, but it's basically all one speed, except for one passage. But variety in terms of color of the instruments. And you've been trying various things, vibrato, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, the ways of getting different colors on the instrument?
I ended up starting out completely without vibrato.
Right.
Which seems to work well.
It gives it this haunting, it is a kind of haunting piece, it has to be said. It gives it a almost eerie, lifeless quality at the beginning, and then you warm it up by the vibrato.
And then if I start out without any vibrato, I don't have to try too hard to warm it up, because you can't really force it, because the tune is so kind of sinuous.
Right.
Weird climbing, chromatic things.
Yeah.
Almost a little creepy sounding. It kind of reminds me almost like foreshadowing of the Passacaglia from Peter Grimes. Just the way the line works.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah,
kind of
I agree.
Version.
It's an uneasy. It's very beautiful, and in some ways it's serene, but it's definitely uneasy, isn't it? Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there's something
haunting quality to it without.
But I think Britten does that a lot. I feel like he uses some kind of. Sometimes his tunes sound simple on the surface, but he uses them to express like emotionally complicated things.
Absolutely right. Even at the tender age of 16, perhaps.
Yeah.
And the accompaniment, and often, as Tim was saying, the accompaniment is very sparse and kind of difficult to get your ear around, because it's often pizzicato, plucking the strings very, very softly. And the chords are very strange in places. I mean, it's tonal, but And again, at the age of 16, maybe it's fairly experimental in that sense. Even though you're right, I think there's the Britten stamp already there.
Mm-hmm.
But you could tell that he was experimenting a bit, don't you think?
Yeah.
With his harmonic language. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're playing it, Tim, and I've enjoyed rehearsing with you this week, and let's have a good performance tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much for finding this piece. I didn't know it existed. So.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for playing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.